Check one, check two.
All right, we are at the last Smart Home Pavilion talk of the day. This is going to be a good one. It's a good one to end on. Right here we have Chris, David, whatever. I can't read. Chris Kanish, and he does computer science at the University of Illinois at Chicago. We're going to be talking about security, which is actually super important.
Absolutely.
So why don't you have a seat?
Thank you.
Now, let's start off just big. What, in your mind, is the biggest security threat? So sensors are in everything, right?
Right,
Everything's
absolutely.
talking to everything. They're being taken over to run DDoS attacks on things.
Exactly.
What is the biggest concern in your mind? Like, what keeps you up at night about this type of, like, IoT security or
I think
smart
that
home security?
Probably for this level, the thing that keeps me up at night would be the perfect is the enemy of the good. Right?
Okay.
There are a lot of things that we look at in research. We say, what is the newest, most dangerous, most far-reaching potential threat that exists out there? Like, you've got your Chinese hackers, you've got your Russian hackers, you've got these people that are spending, 16 hours a day. They are incredibly smart. They're going to find the most intricate attack they possibly could, right? And what I see as dangerous is not those people, but the little mistakes that people make day by day, bit by bit, that are just very human, like, oh, I was supposed to update that software, but then I decided not to.
Yeah.
Right? You take that and you multiply it by the hundreds, thousands, millions of people that have like IoT devices, and that's where lots of that vulnerability comes in, where we know in the abstract how to do these things correctly, but actually operationalizing that is the real challenge, making sure that everybody can get their updates in, follow a lot of simple best practices, stuff like that.
Whose fault is that, right? So it's like apathy, right? But if I just have a smart, light bulb, well, why would I think that I need to update some firmware or whatever it is, right?
Right,
like,
right.
Who should the onus be on? Manufacturers, the consumers, both? What?
That is a great question. I think that the biggest thing I was thinking before I came out here today about what we're talking about, what you guys are doing here, forever and ever, you sold durable goods. Somebody walks into a Best Buy, somebody walks into an appliance store, they buy something, you have some sort of warranty, but you don't need to keep that up, right?
Yeah.
There's a very, very long amount of time as you built the best thing you possibly could, you built it correctly, you have a warranty in case it breaks down, but otherwise you move forward with life, right? That device, it is the same thing it was the day it was shipped to 1 year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, but with smart devices, that's absolutely not the case. Like, you can think of it that way, but it's really not the case. There are people out there that understand more about how that software works. They're going to be finding mistakes in it. And it's like, the amazing part is that, yes, the manufacturer can ship an update that doesn't require anybody to even touch anything, and all of a sudden the device gets smarter or the device gets more secure. That's fantastic. I think to answer your question directly, that onus really does fall on the manufacturers, but it's a really, really big difference between selling durable goods to selling something that is a lifelong, it is a relationship with that customer for the life of the device, and it's ongoing every single month, every single day. That device needs to still be secure, still needs to be functional.
Well, and it's also having to think about them differently, right? Like, I never needed to reboot my fridge.
Exactly.
Right, but
And
now
you shouldn't have to, right?
You're darn right I shouldn't have to. So let me ask you that: do you have a smart home? Like, do you populate your home with IoT devices?
I have a smart thermostat, but that is it.
Okay. Now, is that by choice, or is that by that I mean,
that was
like,
by choice. I wanted to add that to my home. I'm very happy with it.
Okay, but what I mean is your dearth of other products,
Right.
smart-related products, is that a conscientious choice? Because you're like, I research this stuff all day. I know how vulnerable they are, and I'm not going to put that thing in my house?
That's a great question. So I would absolutely say no. I think and this is more about who I am as a consumer myself personally, is that if I want something that is a fridge, I want it to do the fridgy thing really, really well.
Right.
Like,
You
I
want it to keep cold.
Exactly, right? I want it to use as least energy as much as possible, right? Or a smart TV is another good thing. This is the perfect example to me personally. So like if I want a TV, I want a TV that has good color and it's like really thin and all this stuff. Whereas if I want some smart thing, I'm going to buy the smart attachment that I hook up to my TV, and then I get that out of an Apple TV or Roku or whatever have you. And that way, if I want a new version of that. I don't have to buy a new $600 TV. I can buy a new $50 box.
Yeah.
And separating the appliance from the smart works out really well for a lot of situations, but in some things, like with, say, light bulbs, for instance, it's not going to be as easy to split those things out.
Right. Yeah, I've always thought instead of building a screen on a fridge,
Right.
put a hanger that you can put a tablet on. Right?
Yes, that is exactly what I will probably end up doing.
Okay. So what is it that you are, tell me specifically what you're studying.
Yeah, definitely. So I study what I call sociotechnical cybersecurity. And so this is the connection between all of the really pure technical attacks that I was talking about before and what happens within the world when everybody's making all these decisions. What do we end up with?
Yeah.
And so sometimes this has come to understanding how much money spammers make as opposed to looking at this pure technical thing. I mean, okay, like if we take this assumption that they're sending spam for a reason, they're probably sending it to make money. So if we can understand how much money they're making, we can say, oh, well, rather than coming up with the pure technical defense that makes every one of the billion spam messages every day sent filtered correctly, let's just come up with a way that makes it harder for them to make money. And that's actually a lot easier problem than the problem of filtering every single spam message. Yeah. And so more recently, I've been looking at things like browser security, where a lot of the times there's so many amazing things that a web browser can do nowadays. Unfortunately, a lot of those things end up being used by companies to do a lot of tracking, a lot of privacy invasive things, and they can actually even be used to compromise your computer. There's a lot of super powerful features in a modern web browser, and what I have done in my research with my students is say, how many of these are really, really necessary for the things that users want? Because what we really want to do is provide the users with the interesting, enjoyable, useful experiences they want, and nothing else besides that.
Right.
And so that's really when you're trying to find a user-serving tool, then that's really what you need. You want to say, I want to provide for the user of this device. And I think this fits into the IoT space as well really, really well. Because when you create let's go back to the smart fridge example. When you create a smart fridge, part of the potential benefit to that is, oh, I could ship a software update tomorrow, and your fridge that you already bought could have this amazing new feature. Like, this is part of the benefit. It gets smarter, it has new features, and that's just great. The flip side to that is really this, what do users need out of this thing that they're buying?
Yeah.
And so if you can really limit that. Within security, we have this really, really important, powerful principle called the principle of least privilege, where if you're going to give a capability to do something to someone, like say an app, someone wants to install an app on your fridge.
Right.
You can either say, oh, well, give me the program that you wrote, and I'm just going to run it on the fridge, and it's going to do whatever it needs to do to show the user this interesting experience. And so that's not the principle of least privilege, because really, really quickly what might happen is that fridge gets a program on it that is not supposed to be there, and it can start sending messages to anywhere else in the world, whatever types of messages it wants to. We had a lot of these smart devices in a botnet recently that had a really, really big DDoS attack, and that was because somebody could run these programs, and those programs could just talk to any other host in the entire internet. And if you have thousands and thousands of these devices, and they all decide, oh, I'm going to send millions of messages as fast as I can, that's very, very powerful when it comes to performing an attack on the internet.
How concerned should people be as they smarten up their home, right? Like there is there are different levels of it, right?
Right.
And you read about stuff, and you maybe you put a smart, like a Wemo switch in your house.
Yep.
Because you want to just turn on the lights or whatever, just by talking, or the outside lights because it's cold outside, right? How concerned do I need to be that it is being used? Should I care if it's being used in a DDoS attack on somebody?
That's a great question.
And if I should care, like how concerned do I need to be that it's happening to my little Wemo switch in my little corner of the world?
Right. So I guess the first question there of how concerned should I be? At the end of the day, it isn't going to cause a significant negative experience for that one user. Like maybe part of their internet connection is a little bit slower. Maybe that Wemo switch will drain its battery 5 times faster than it would have otherwise. But you're absolutely right. There's not a huge, strong reason for you to do that. There are no laws that say if you have a compromised device in your home and it gets used to perform a cyber attack, unbeknownst to you, there's no law that says, oh, you are in trouble for this.
Yeah.
That's not that big a deal. I think moving forward on that a little bit, I would say that really understanding what could happen there is a little bit of another part to my research of really seeing when we have all of our data in the cloud, it's in our devices, it's stored here, there, everywhere, and all of those devices are intimately connected with the IoT devices that I have installed on my home. I've really got to wonder, I'm bringing this device into my home. That makes it much easier for that device to talk to, perhaps I had all of my iCloud backups on a box right there. I have my backup machine, right? Or I have a network attached hard disk, something like that. When you bring one of these devices from outside, you bring it in, it gets to cooperate with all the other devices in my home, which is really, really good because that's kind of what I want in the smart home situation. But it also brings it within my perimeter of this is my network where I have a bunch of machines where all of them need to be able to talk to the other ones. And all of a sudden say, my Wemo switch is compromised. Maybe it sees all of my backups of all of my tax returns that I had on my external hard drive. That could not. That would be much, much harder to do when it's some hacker in the middle of nowhere than if it's someone who's inside your house, like on your house's network.
Right.
That's really where that becomes a little bit more dangerous. I think it's most dangerous when it comes to things like recording devices. So, in-home surveillance. If one of those machines or one of the machines that's adjacent to it gets compromised and it can take this video feed, if that's something that you don't want, J random person on the other side of the world to see, then that's something you really need to worry about.
Are these, so I'm not as technical on this front. So I don't have these, but I'm just listing off things, right? So you would have like a smart lock, a smart switch, smart speaker. Let's just take those three things. Are those easily identifiable just on the internet writ large? So by that I mean like someone could see like, are they, as somebody came across, they would know like, oh, this is the lock. Is that like August smart lock? Sorry, August, but like is broadcasting like I'm a lock, right? As I communicate back with the mothership.
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and thankfully the answer to that is no. Okay. It is not that way. So you've got the first generation of internet-enabled smart devices. You think of like really, really old cameras, like surveillance cameras, right? There are a lot of surveillance cameras where it's like, oh, I didn't have a cloud server to talk to, so I just am a server myself, and anybody that can find, say, this IP address for this camera, be like, oh, well, I can log into this camera and see what there is. And all it takes is really finding where that device is. Like nowadays, basically every one of the smart devices that we have is phoning home specifically to the company that sold it. Right. So say your August smart lock, it is almost certainly you install this, you can directly talk to it via your Wi-Fi locally, like you are talking directly to that lock. But when it comes to the internet portion of that, there's one pipe between that smart lock and August servers. Okay. Now, that pipe could be tricked in some way by some attacker, but it's relatively uncommon, relatively unlikely. Yeah. But yeah, to answer your question directly, so many of these devices are partially funded by the speculation based on collecting every bit of data as you possibly can. Part of that is I want to make a better smart lock, so I want to know how these are used. I want to know everything that this smart lock knows and sees of when somebody comes and when somebody goes, and I'm probably going to collect that information. And so I want all communication between that lock and the rest of the world, even if it's your phone, my phone, we're like your wife's phone who wants to get in, whatever have you. Like they want to know, oh, this person looked it up, this person looked it up. All of that goes through a central, usually cloud server that's owned by that provider, owned by that appliance maker, and that is the only one that lock will talk to directly under normal operation. Now, if something were to happen where there was a bug that could be exploited by an attacker, they can very easily say, well, rather than talking to the August server, I'm going to talk to some other server somewhere else in the world. But the important part, I think, from your question is they can't just come in there. In almost all cases that I'm aware of, they can't just come in and say, oh, I can now talk to this lock that's installed in this in this home. Okay. It's almost all mediated by cloud servers owned by the appliance makers.
What is the role of artificial intelligence in all of this, right? So I imagine every smart device, everything with a sensor is talking back to something, and it's transmitting all kinds of data. It's all whatever. In the case of the lock, like when it was opened, when it was closed, how long it was closed,
Right.
And and in case of something that has more sensors, ambient temperatures, things like that, right? So there are these vast data sets that are coming in from everywhere.
Absolutely.
And so you've got these machine learning algorithms that will pick stuff up. What is that role in security, right? Like those, it's one of the things we've talked about today a lot is that there are different ecosystems, right? So Amazon's not going to talk to Google.
Yep.
And each maker is going to have their own data set that is separate from one another. Is that a good or a bad thing in your mind?
So that's definitely a good thing in my mind. The fact that we can have more than one company doing this, it's good for a lot of reasons. Two, isn't that great, right? You probably optimally want more than a duopoly in that space.
Sure.
But two is better than one, three is better than two, et cetera.
Yeah.
So with respect to security and IoT and machine learning, deep learning, et cetera, things like that, the biggest success case, the example there, of course, is like Face ID, right?
Yeah.
So Face ID is very fundamentally a machine learning based authentication scheme. And you could imagine that type of intelligent device is going to trickle down into IoT devices, into smart appliances, the types of things we'd see around here.
Why wouldn't that prevent the DDoS attack then, right? Like, wouldn't it be able to go like, oh, there's a lot of activity coming off, or is it just bypassing that altogether, right? So talking about security and all of these things connected to the internet means all those more opportunities for somebody to hop on and do something with it.
Right.
Is that, and maybe I'm just thinking of it incorrectly.
So when it comes to lots of people being able to, so I guess when it comes to machine learning, one thing it has is that modern machine learning requires mountains and mountains of data to do its job correctly. I think that's what you're mentioning, and that's absolutely true. And so again, that mountain of data is going directly to Amazon servers, or going directly to Google servers, or directly to Apple servers. And those companies are very, very good about keeping their data under wraps.
Yeah.
Right? If your threat model, if you're worried about Google, the company, having your data, you should be very afraid. If you're worried about someone breaking into Google and taking your data, you can be much, much less afraid in that case, because they're doing a very good job at the top end security-wise. I think that I would not be too worried about that. So having all of that data in one place or controlled by one entity could potentially be bad. It might be able to learn stuff about us that we wouldn't want to, or maybe even things that we didn't know about ourselves. But in general, it's still doing more good than harm. It's with AI, where it becomes dangerous is especially in the security context, where I'm going to say, I'm going to rely on this device to not fail in a way I didn't expect when I say want to secure my home. You could imagine that the next version of the Ring doorbell could have face detection so that you didn't have to have your fob or your phone or anything like that. It could just say, oh, this is definitely Chris. I know that it's him. I'll unlock the door. Yeah. Right? When it comes to machine learning, we are not at the level where I would ever recommend anyone install something like that. Right? I think that people can figure enough stuff out. You know, they can look at one of these, they can test it in interesting ways, and they can be like, oh, wow, I can put on, actually one of my former students did some research on face detection specifically, where they could say, oh, here's a picture of Chris, and I want to make this Chris look like this Chris. And so they'd say, oh, I'm going to take this picture of Chris, I'm going to do a bunch of really complicated math, and I'm going to print out some paper glasses. And just put those glasses on this Chris, and then a face detection algorithm would say, oh, it's this Chris. Right. And those glasses, they have some weird pattern on them, but they just look really stylish. They don't look like they're anything too incredibly uncommon. So this just is an example of unexpected, like we do not have a strong enough understanding of how those algorithms work to really trust them with something that's very societally important. Gotcha. Right? When it comes to, say, figuring out which of my friends are in a picture on Facebook, for me, that's not societally important. It's fun, it's nice, and it makes my life easier and more enjoyable, but it's not something that I'm going to be relying on, say, to, do policing, where I'm going to say, I'm going to detect who did this crime, or I'm going to see who can get into my house or whatever like that. We are definitely not at the point where we can trust those algorithms because we don't really understand why they work as well as they do, and the areas where they can be very, very easily fooled, which happens a lot.
In our last minute here, what is one thing you want people to know, like just if you could just send one message out into the world, and we're being live streamed right now.
Yeah.
So what do you want people to know about security as it relates to the smart home, or just cybersecurity in general?
I think I'd probably go back to my first point that security is not so much a product itself as security is a process that you go through. It's a continual process of I have to make all of these really small decisions over and over and over again. I need to kind of make them right. Like I need to not share my password with a lot of other places. I need to decide to use two-factor authentication when I really care about an account like my email account or my bank account or things along those lines. Because a lot of the times when, like, we are human, we're gonna make little mistakes all of the time, but if you are doing, quote unquote, the right things, like using password managers, using unique passwords, using two-factor authentication, things along the, installing software updates, those are the things that I really think, if you just do these on a regular basis, it's kind of a good hygiene type thing, and it will give you a much, much better security stance, and probably have far fewer security headaches in the future if you follow that set of relatively easy set of things to do.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much. Chris Kanish teaches computer science at the University of Chicago, University of Illinois at Chicago.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so
thanks
much.
So much.